So the Justice Department is saying former Vice President Mike Pence won't be facing charges for the possible mishandling of classified documents. The DOJ confirming that it sent Pence a letter clearing him of any wrongdoing. Around a dozen documents turned up at Pence's Indiana home in January, and they were immediately given to authorities. The former vice president took responsibility and conceded that mistakes were made. In the meantime, former President Trump is not off the hook for classified documents found at Mar-a-Lago. A lot of the focus has been on an audio recording of Trump talking about a classified document that he kept. Scripps political director Andrew Rafferty updates us now on the investigation.
New developments in the investigation into former President Donald Trump's handling of classified documents. Federal prosecutors have reportedly obtained an audio recording of the former president taken during the summer of 2021. During that recording, sources say Trump admitted he held onto a classified document that detailed a possible attack against Iran. CNN was the first to report on the existence of the recording. The outlet says it was taken during a meeting at Trump's golf course in Bedminster, New Jersey. Among the participants, people helping former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows pen his memoir. The audio hasn't been made public, and Scripps News has not listened to it. The anonymous source who spoke to CNN refused to disclose exactly what Trump said, word for word. Attorneys for the former president say he had the authority to take whatever materials he wanted out of the White House.
But I'm not going to bite on a leak campaign and try the case in the media. What I will tell you is there is no doubt that as commander-in-chief, and when the president left Washington, D.C. for Mar-a-Lago, he was actually still president. When he left for Mar-a-Lago with boxes of documents that other people packed for him that he brought, he was the commander-in-chief. There is no doubt that he has the constitutional authority as commander-in-chief to declassify. It does not have to go through some sort of bureaucratic process to be declassified.
According to CNN, the recording is in the hands of special counsel Jack Smith.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
And sources tell the network it was played during testimony given to a grand jury looking into Trump's alleged mishandling of dozens of classified documents discovered at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. If all this is true, the recording steps on Trump's claims he made just weeks ago at a CNN town hall that he declassified all government documents that were in his possession after he left the White House.
Did you ever show those classified documents to anyone?
Not really. I would have the right to. By the way, they were declassified
What do you mean, not
after.
really?
Not that I can think of. I don't have anything. I have no classified documents. And by the way, they become automatically declassified when I took them.
Former prosecutors say any evidence proving Trump knew he had classified material and understood the restrictions around it would be key in the decision to criminally charge him.
If it's true, it is the biggest nail in former President Trump's coffin to date. I mean, as a white-collar prosecutor, you always strive to get the principal target on tape admitting the crime, because the hardest thing to prove is whether they knew their conduct was criminal.
Trump has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing when it comes to allegations that he mishandled classified documents. The special counsel's office refused to comment on reports surrounding the recording. Andrew Rafferty, Scripps News, Washington.
Michael Scotto joins me now live. He is a criminal defense attorney at the Scotto Law Office specializing in white-collar crimes. Michael, thank you so much for your time today.
Good morning. Good afternoon. Excuse me. I'm used to coming on at 7.
So, Michael, what does this all mean? What could this recording do for Jack Smith and his investigation into these classified documents found at Mar-a-Lago? Is this the nail in the coffin, like that former prosecutor was just saying? Is this game over for former President Trump?
Well, you know, obviously a lot has to do with what the tape says, but clearly the defense that's been erected, towards these pending charges or potentially pending charges is that he declassified everything, or didn't know what he had. Here we have apparently a recording that the former President Trump knew was being made because, as we know from the media reports, that he had an aide recording interviews with some other people who were writing books, and apparently this was in connection to that. So he knew the recording was being made, so he'd have no reason not to, accurately reflect what was going on. And he admits that he had this classified document, And in the recording, apparently, he admits that it wasn't declassified. So this whole defense of automatically everything was declassified when he took it out of the White House and he left, that never was a good defense, in my opinion. But clearly, he didn't even believe that when the recording was made. Again, if this is what's on the recording. And clearly, it's an identifiable document that had to do with a very serious issue, which is war plans, potential war plans against Iran. So again, there's no defense in that case, in that the movers just packed everything up and we left with all this classified material. I think what makes it very different than the case with former Vice President Pence is there was no evidence that former Vice President Pence knew that he took any documents. When he found out that there were classified documents, he contacted the government and he returned them. And in the case of former President Trump, it's much different. But I think this tape, if it is as advertised, is extremely damaging.
And when you look at the different presidents, vice presidents who've been implicated in these types of situations, whether it is President Biden or former Vice President Pence, the timeline also matters, I would assume, because they both reacted swiftly, from my understanding, returned those documents and then complied with the investigation.
Right. Right. And again, I think that's the distinction between the reason why the criminal investigation against former President Trump is still proceeding is because he didn't do that. He did, apparently, according to what we've read, exactly the opposite. Didn't have it. His attorneys had submitted affidavits saying we did a thorough search and we didn't have it. And of course, ultimately, the government executed search warrants and they found, many of the things that they thought would be there. So I think that's the distinction. And again, it could be possible that, as we know with former VP Pence and President Biden and also former President Carter, that, apparently there were some classified documents that managed to leave office when they left office. But again, it's the way that they reacted to that, and then they returned them when they realized.
Michael, I want to pull back the curtain for just a second and ask you to take us through the process here, because during a CNN town hall, we remember that Trump stated that those documents were automatically declassified. He said that he could declassify them just by thinking about it. What was he talking about exactly? And what is the actual process to declassify documents?
Well, I mean, the process is, it's a formal process. So the idea that the president could merely think about it. I mean, the town hall. Look, that's in my opinion, that's the public relations end of this. That it would not be a defense at trial, frankly, because it's just not the case. But now, given the tape, even if that's the defense you were going to proffer, how could you proffer that? But there's a formal procedure for declassifying things, and there have been many experts who know this issue much better than I do, who have laid that out. Again, it's not just the case that I'm the president and, I just decided that on my way out of office, I'm going to magically declassify things. It just doesn't work that way. And again, we know that if this recording is accurate, he didn't believe it worked that way when the recording was made. And so, what was he saying at the time when he didn't know this was an issue? He was saying, apparently, it needs to be declassified. Wow, I didn't do that before I left office. What's he saying now, and what are his attorneys saying in the light of a criminal investigation? Oh, there's some sort of presidential magic that everything's declassified as long as I take it out of the White House. So again, I think that's the significance of this tape, and it's powerful evidence. When you're doing a criminal investigation, and I used to do a lot of wiretap cases, you're trying to get courts to grant you a wiretap so that you can listen into what's going on. And here, again, we have the president's own words, which will, if this story is true, will be played back before the grand jury. And if there's an indictment returned, will be played before the petit jury that hears the case. And again, it'll be powerful evidence because it'll establish his knowledge of what he had, that it was a serious document. I mean, there may be some unclassified or classified documents that people say, well, they're not all created equal. But I would have to say, in my opinion, plans that had to do with a potential war against Iran, that's putting service members in danger, and it's very serious. And again, in this case, the recording, which we haven't heard yet, but if it's as advertised, it admits his knowledge that it was a serious document. It admits that he had it. He admits that it wasn't declassified, and he admits that it should have been. So it is a powerful piece of evidence. I mean, nail in the coffin, I guess, yeah, sure. That's that's certainly a powerful piece of evidence.
And Michael, what kind of charges are we talking about here? I mean, if these recordings do exist,
well, it's
and the
under
president
the
has acknowledged that he wanted to share this classified information, could this start another investigation? Would we be looking at the Espionage Act here? What kind of charges could he be facing? And how do you think this all plays out?
Act. Right, it is potentially an Espionage Act case, and just for simply taking the documents and retaining them and not doing anything with them, it's a potential 10-year sentence. These are serious charges, and again, just gathering or transmitting this information and just permitting it to be removed, and even with gross negligence, it's actually a lower standard, right? Gross negligence, that finds somebody guilty of this charge. And again, the penalty is up to 10 years in jail. There was an NSA employee about, 16 years ago who took 2 boxes out when he left the NSA. The FBI executed a search warrant, and it wasn't clear whether he intended to use them, but that gentleman was basically sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. And then there's the other more recent case with, her name is actually Reality Winner, and she was also leaking classified information, and I believe she received a 3-year sentence. So, I mean, these are very serious charges, and I think particularly the nature of the document, if these were war plans against potentially an adversary like Iran, that it just makes it a much more serious situation.
So will he be criminally charged and potentially face prison time?
I mean, it's up to whether the special prosecutor asks the grand jury to charge him. But based on, if this tape is what it is, and it seems to be by all accounts, yeah, it would be a very low standard, just probable cause standard for the grand jury to return an indictment. So it's a question of whether or not Jack Smith decides that the case should be considered by a grand jury. But yeah, I think there's a very good chance that, if it's true that this recording exists, that yes, the president, this is, right now, given what we now know, I think the most serious case that's currently pending, although I understand Georgia may be coming down sometime over the summer as well. So yeah, I can't predict whether Jack Smith will ask a grand jury to return an indictment, but I would say that any prosecutor who had that type of evidence would, under the circumstances, and I think, I hope to think most fair-minded Americans would think that this is a serious thing and it's not a political witch hunt, as the former president has said at various times.
Well, we've got an election right around the corner, so we're going to have to see what comes next in all of this. Criminal defense attorney Michael Scotto, thank you so much for joining us today in the afternoon, not in the morning. Always nice to see you. Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
Scorsese Live continues after this.